Yeah, Mkoma, I heard the audio, but what that woman has failed to understand and grasp is the fact that Mthuli was not taken from Davos, Namnangagwa. Mthuli was pushed into the face of Mnangagwa by the Rockefeller family and the Rothschilds family because he has been a family member, a family friend rather, of the Rockefeller family, and he's a constant guest at the Rothschilds mansions, and he lives in the properties. They're the two families in Geneva, in Switzerland. So he is on a mission. There's no doubt about that. No matter how much they try to polish his name, he's properly, very squarely, a puppet. There's no doubt about that in my mind. But I think what we are forgetting to say to people, she has already said it. The liberation of Zimbabwe could not become complete without the aspect of land being addressed. War was about the land, which is why you found at independence countries such as the United Kingdom and the USA, what was called the Anglo-Saxon axis, they sat and held conferences privately to try and determine which between these two people was a better devil for them to face after independence, Joshua Nkomo or Robert Mugabe. Believe it or not, they agreed amongst themselves that Robert Mugabe was a better devil to face than Joshua Nkomo. And the reasons were only two. The first reason was that Robert Mugabe was concerned with political ideology of Marxism, Leninism, socialism, communism, all bent into one. They knew that that theory, that ideology could never be transformed into anything practical because the entire world had failed. It is utopian. There's no way that a communist society can actually exist on the planet because by nature humanity is born greedy, and therefore to have a society in which there's no leader is something that is totally unfathomable. And so the second reason that they settled for Robert Mugabe was that Joshua Nkomo was the only one of the two leaders who talked about land before independence. Joshua Nkomo said we went to war for the land. Nothing else should be put on the table for us to discuss until we have settled the aspect of land. So the white men knew that if Joshua Nkomo won at independence, then it meant that the white farmers would lose their land almost immediately. So they needed an individual who was going to waste a lot of time talking about ideology rather than land, which is what Robert Mugabe did for years and years. And he talked about Ujamaa from Tanzania. He talked about Hungarian socialism, Yugoslavian socialism. He had good friends with the President Josep Tito. He had very good links with Mao Zedong, with Leonid Brezhnev of Russia. All these people were hobnobbing with President Mugabe. He had his vision, and there is no reason to condemn it. But I am not too sure that he was not aware that he was being used as an instrument to delay the reallocation of land because of the theoretical basis of his ideological thrust. And so Nkomo was denied the victory. Nkomo raised hell at independence. And if you remember, about 3 weeks after the counting of the votes in 1980, a British Airways cargo plane, a Boeing 747, landed at Harare International Airport. It had no passengers on board. It only had the pilots and the attendants. And so the most amazing thing was that trucks came from all over the country to coincide with the arrival of that plane. Of course, government already knew. And what was it, the purpose of that plane? It was to ferry all the ballot boxes which had been cast in the Zimbabwean election of 1980. And so all the ballot boxes of the entire country were flown in a British empty cargo plane to London. And so, what was the real intention of Britain in collecting the ballot boxes? It meant that if Nkomo stood up and began to protest over the election, there was no recourse. There would be no V11s. There would be no evidence of what had actually taken place because they had chosen their men to be in position. And therefore, this is how we began to lose the entire plot. The other thing to consider is the fact that it was not a coincidence that 90% of the Zimbabwean government from independence were children of immigrants from Malawi. It is not a coincidence, and I'll repeat it to anybody who wishes to listen. And it is that which caused us to lose the entire plot that we are discussing today. It was not a coincidence. It was not a coincidence either that when the reallocation of land began, the land invasions as they were called, the Jambanja that we have come to know it as Chimrenga 3, thereabouts. Who were the beneficiaries of the land reform? Remember what they did to Kumbirai Kangai Manyika? They deliberately compromised him and shifted him out of orbit. So he left the office and was immediately replaced by Minister Made, who himself is of Malawian descent. And therefore, immediately after he assumed the position of Minister of Lands, which was responsible for the reallocation of the farms, he allocated to his kith and kin, he allocated to all people like him. And therefore, the main or principal beneficiaries of the land question were people who were of Malawian stock. They worked on the same farms and got the same farms. They didn't have the knowledge, they didn't have the know-how to operate the farms, and therefore most of them just sat on the farms and were making shebeens. Everybody knows that. Now, why were they not on the list of those that had been listed as beneficiaries of the land reform program? Because their identity cards at the time of the land reacquisition were branded foreign. The constitution had not changed, and therefore all the children of immigrants, Malawians, Mozambicans, Zambians, had ID cards that were written alien on them. And it is that which they needed to remove, because the constitution would not allow an alien to occupy land, an alien to own land or to have deeds or to take part in any public plebiscite or to aim for a high position of political authority within government. And therefore, during this time, they were now tinkering around with the constitution to accommodate their own people. They did that. The first review, the second review, which if you look at the names of the people who took part in the last review, most of them are women who are hiding behind their married names. But if you retrace, you find that practically 99% of those on the list of the so-called local experts were of Malawian origin. And so this whole thing continued. And most people prefer to pretend that these things did not actually happen, when in fact they did. We kept coming up with the statement, Zimbabwe will never be a colony again. It was a popular mantra by the ZANU-PF government. But the truth of the matter was that it was already a colony again. Made's job was to make sure that Gideon Chikono, whom we call Gono, who is of Malawian origin himself, his job was to ensure that money flows from the central bank into the CBZ, which practically he owned, and he left one of his minions in position, who is Mangunja, whom he left again the key position of Reserve Bank governor when he stepped down. They are all of Malawian origin. And so all the agricultural mechanization equipment that was bought from Malaysia is not to be accounted for today.